A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Wolf in the Road. The lights of Mercy General Hospital had burned themselves into Harper Cole's retinas, but at 3 a.m, even those harsh beams felt merciful compared to the weight pressing against her chest. 28 years old, and she could map her entire future in 12-hour shifts stretching endlessly ahead, coffee breaks at midnight, charting patient vitals while the rest of the world slept, driving home through empty suburbs where nothing ever changed. She peeled off her scrubs in the staff locker room, her green-gray eyes catching her reflection in the scratched mirror. The same face that greeted her every morning. The same brown hair falling past her shoulders in waves that never quite behaved. The same freckles scattered across her nose that her aunt used to say made her look younger than she was. The parking lot stretched before her, sodium lights casting everything in shades of orange and shadow. Her Honda started on the third try, and she pulled onto the access road leading back to the subdivision where she'd lived since her aunt passed 2 years ago. Inherited the house, inherited the mortgage, inherited a life that felt several sizes too small. The streets were empty at this hour. Harper took the familiar turns without thinking, her mind still cataloging the night's patients. The elderly man in 3B who reminded her of her uncle. The teenager with the broken arm who'd been too brave to cry, lives intersecting with hers for brief moments before spinning away again, leaving her standing in the same spot she'd always occupied. She turned onto Maple Street, her headlights cutting through the darkness. Then she saw it. Harper's foot slammed the brake pedal, and her seatbelt caught hard against her chest. There, illuminated directly in front of her driveway, something small and dark lay crumpled on the asphalt. Her heart hammered as she shifted into park and killed the engine. The neighborhood was silent, except for the tick of her cooling car. She should call animal control. She should stay in the vehicle. She should do a lot of things that weren't stepping out into the October chill wearing nothing but her civilian clothes and exhaustion. But Harper was a nurse. An instinct outweighed common sense. The moment she crouched beside the creature, her breath caught. It was a wolf pup. Far too young to be alone and far too impossible to be real. There were no wolves in suburban Oregon. There hadn't been for decades. Yet here one lay, sides heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, its dark fur matted with something that wasn't quite blood. The animal's eyes opened briefly, reflecting her headlights in shades of amber that seemed too bright, too aware. The pup whimpered, and Harper's professional assessment kicked in. Shock. Possible internal injuries. The odd angle of one hind leg suggested trauma, but it was the strange quality of the wounds that made her pause. They looked like the animal had been injured from the inside out, muscle and tissue distorted in ways that didn't match any attack pattern she'd ever seen. She didn't think. She scooped the pup into her arms, feeling its too hot body trembling against her chest, and carried it through her front door. Her kitchen table became a makeshift exam surface. She cleared away the mail and grocery circulars, then laid the wolf down as gently as she could. The pup's breathing was getting worse. Harper grabbed clean towels from the linen closet, filled a bowl with lukewarm water, and began cleaning the wounds. She had no idea what she was doing, treating a wild animal on her kitchen table at 3:30 in the morning, but stopping wasn't an option. Time slipped. Harper worked in the focus that came from years of emergency nursing, checking vitals by touch, monitoring the rise and fall of the small chest. The pup's temperature was spiking. She pressed a cool cloth against its fur and watched those amber eyes track her movements with an intelligence that made something cold slide down her spine. Then came the pounding on her front door. Harper jerked upright, her heart slamming into her throat. The pounding came again, harder this time, shaking the frame. She moved toward the door on instinct, then stopped. It was nearly 4 a.m. No one knocked at 4 a.m, unless something was very wrong. She approached slowly, flipping on the porch light, and peered through the peephole. A man stood on her doorstep. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes that made him blend into the shadows. His face was partially turned away, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the tension radiating from him. When he lifted his hand to pound again, she caught a glimpse of his eyes through the peephole's distortion. They were glowing. A bright, impossible gold that couldn't be real. Couldn't be anything but a trick of the light. or her exhausted mind playing games. "I know you have it," the man said, and his voice carried through the door with absolute authority. "Return what you took, and I'll leave." Harper's hand hovered over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at her not to open the door. But something in his voice, beneath the command, sounded desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about," she called back, proud that her voice stayed mostly steady. "The wolf. I can smell it from here. Open the door." Her blood went cold. She looked back at the kitchen, where the pup still lay on her table, its breathing now so shallow she couldn't see its sides moving. This man wanted the animal. This man had probably hurt it in the first place. Every protective instinct in her body flared to life. "Leave," Harper said. "Or I'm calling the police." The man went very still. Then he moved, and it wasn't a movement any normal human should have been able to make. One moment he was standing on her porch. The next, he was somehow pressing against the door hard enough that she heard the frame creak. "That wolf is my son," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely human. "Open this door right now, or I'll remove it from the hinges." Harper's hand was already on her phone. 911 punched in, but not yet called. Her finger hovered over the button. The door shuddered again. Then she heard it. A sound from the kitchen that made her blood freeze. A sound halfway between a whimper and something else. Something that might have been a child crying. She left the door and ran back to the table. The wolf was changing. For several seconds, Harper's brain refused to process what she was seeing. Her body wanted to run. Her mind screamed that this couldn't be real. That exhaustion, stress, and years of night shifts had finally cracked something inside her. But the child on her table was breathing, crying, bleeding. And nurses didn't get to panic. They acted. The disbelief could come later. Then, the front door exploded inward. The man from the porch filled her doorway, and Harper's first coherent thought was that he was too large, too powerful, too everything to be contained in her small suburban house. His eyes were still that impossible gold, and when he saw the thing on her table, the half-transformed child writhing in pain, something in his face cracked open. "Theo," he breathed, and crossed to the table in 2 strides. Harper stumbled backward, her shoulders hitting the kitchen wall. She watched as the man, this stranger who had just destroyed her front door, gathered the child into his arms with a gentleness that didn't match anything else about him. The boy, because it was clearly a boy now, despite the patches of fur still clinging to his skin, went limp against the man's chest. "What did you do to him?" The man's head snapped toward Harper, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Handsome in a brutal way, all sharp angles and barely contained violence. His eyes had faded from gold to light brown, but they pinned her in place with the same intensity. "Nothing," Harper managed. "I found him. Like that. On my street." The man's gaze raked over her, assessing and dismissing her as a threat in the same breath. Then he looked down at the child in his arms, and Harper saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Raw, undiluted terror that this powerful, dangerous man was trying desperately to contain. The boy's breathing hitched. His small hand, still tipped with what might have been claws, reached out and grasped the fabric of Harper's shirt. His fingers twisted in the cotton, holding on with surprising strength. "Theo," the man said softly. "Let go." But the child didn't release her. Instead, he turned his face toward Harper, and his eyes, when they opened, were the same light brown as the man's. The same shape. Unmistakably related. "Don't leave," the boy whispered, his voice rough and barely human. "Please don't leave." Harper looked from the child's desperate face to the man's shocked expression. She had no idea what was happening. No idea what these people were, or why a wolf had become a boy on her kitchen table. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything in her life had just changed. Chapter 2. Revelations and Bargains. Julian Frost couldn't move his son. That single fact kept him trapped in the small suburban house belonging to a woman whose name he didn't even know, surrounded by floral curtains and grocery store circulars, while his security team waited outside, and his phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from Victoria. Dr. Lena Whitmore's voice had been clinical when she'd explained it over the phone. Moving a shifter child during a failed first transformation can be fatal. The body is trying to establish neural pathways between human and wolf forms. Disruption causes catastrophic system failure. So Julian sat on the woman's worn couch with Theo cradled against his chest, and tried not to think about how his son's breathing still hitched with every inhale. The woman, Harper, stood near the kitchen counter with her arms wrapped around herself. She'd been silent for the past 10 minutes, watching them with eyes that were too calm for someone who'd just witnessed a transformation. Julian didn't trust that calm. Humans panicked. They called authorities. They became liabilities that needed to be managed. "You need to tell me what's happening," Harper said finally. Her voice was steady, the tone she probably used on frightened patients. All of it. Julian's first instinct was to refuse. The fewer details she knew, the easier it would be to handle her later. But Theo shifted against him, whimpering, and Julian felt his resolve crack. This woman had saved his son. She'd brought Theo inside instead of calling animal control. She'd tried to help. "My son is a shifter," Julian said. "Werewolf, if you prefer the term. So am I. We're not the only ones." Harper's expression didn't change, but he saw her fingers tighten on her arms. "How many?" "Thousands. Tens of thousands across North America alone." Julian adjusted Theo's weight, careful of the patches of fur still clinging to the boy's skin. "We've existed alongside humans for centuries. In secret. And you just decided to tell me all of this because I found your kid?" Harper's eyebrow arched. "That seems like a pretty significant breach of your secret." "Smart." Julian filed that observation away. "You witnessed the transformation. I don't have the luxury of lying to you anymore," Theo moaned, and Harper moved before Julian could stop her. She crossed to the couch, knelt beside them, and pressed her fingers to Theo's wrist, counting his pulse with professional efficiency. "His heart rate is elevated but steady," she said. "Temperature still too high. When Dr. Whitmore gets here, I'll need a baseline for normal shifter vitals. You're a nurse." It wasn't a question. "For 6 years," Harper met his eyes. "And right now, that boy needs medical attention." "I don't care what you are. I care that he's in pain." Something in Julian's chest tightened. He'd spent 8 months surrounded by people who treated Theo with kid gloves, who whispered about the poor motherless boy behind his back, but never actually asked what Theo needed. This stranger had known his son for less than an hour, and already understood the only thing that mattered. "His name is Theo," Julian said quietly. "He's 9 years old. He wasn't supposed to shift for another year at least." "What triggered it?" Julian's jaw clenched. "We had an argument. About his mother. She died 8 months ago in a car accident." Harper's expression softened, and Julian hated that. He didn't want her pity. Didn't want to see the same look he'd endured from every member of his pack when they talked about Isabel. "Theo blames himself," Julian continued, the words tasting like ash. "He heard me on the phone one night, telling Victoria that Isabel wouldn't have been driving that road if Theo hadn't asked her to pick up a birthday present he'd forgotten. I thought he was asleep. I didn't know he was listening. Children always hear what we think they don't." Harper sat back on her heels. "He ran away? After I told him he needed to be stronger, to handle his grief better." Julian's voice went flat. "Not my finest moment as a father." The silence stretched between them. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. Julian could hear birds starting their morning songs, the sound absurdly normal for a night that had shattered every boundary he'd tried to maintain. "You can't tell him to be stronger," Harper said finally. "You have to show him how." Julian bristled. "I don't need parenting advice from someone who just met my son. No. You need someone who'll actually tell you the truth instead of whatever yes men you surround yourself with." Harper stood, and despite the exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes, her spine was steel. "While you're in my house, caring for that boy, I'm in charge of his medical care. Non-negotiable." Julian should have been angry. He was the alpha king. People didn't give him ultimatums. But he looked down at Theo, at his son's too pale face, and the way his small body trembled, and knew he had no choice. "Fine," Julian said. "But you follow Dr. Whitmore's instructions exactly. As long as they make medical sense, absolutely. A knock at the door made both of them turn. Julian tensed, but he recognized Victoria's scent even before Harper opened the door. His chief advisor swept in, followed by Dr. Whitmore and 2 security guards who took position outside. Victoria assessed the situation with a single glance. The perimeter is secure. No witnesses to the entry. How is he? She glanced at the splintered front door and sighed. We'll handle the mess. Security will make it look like an attempted break-in, nothing that draws police attention. Harper blinked. You can do that? We can do many things when necessary. Victoria replied dryly. You'll have a new door before sunrise. Stable but struggling, Dr. Whitmore said, already kneeling beside the couch. She was a small woman, with iron-gray hair and hands that moved with absolute confidence. Let me see him, Julian. Julian reluctantly surrendered Theo to the doctor's examination. He stood, needing to move, and found himself next to Harper. She was watching Dr. Whitmore work with the same intensity she'd shown earlier, her trained eye catching every detail. Victoria appeared at his other side. She lingered for a moment, watching Harper calm Theo with steady hands. Something shifted behind her sharp eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition that the boy trusted this woman. Then she cleared her throat and said, We need to discuss containment. Not now, Julian said. Yes, now. Victoria's voice dropped low. This woman is a human who's witnessed a transformation. Protocol requires we address that immediately. Harper's posture went rigid. Julian saw her shift her weight, putting herself slightly closer to where Theo lay. She'd heard every word. What does protocol suggest? Harper asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Memory erasure? An accident? Victoria had the grace to look uncomfortable. There are options that don't involve harm. How generous. Julian stepped between them. No one is erasing anything. Harper helped Theo. That puts her under my protection. Victoria's eyes widened. Julian, you can't just... I can, and I am. He turned to face Harper directly. You'll need to keep what you've seen tonight secret. No telling friends, family, co-workers, no documentation. Can you do that? Harper studied him for a long moment. Then her gaze drifted to Theo, and something in her expression shifted. Yes, on one condition. You're not in a position to bargain. Neither are you. Harper crossed her arms. You need me to keep quiet, and your son needs medical monitoring. So here's the deal. I keep your secret. In exchange, I stay involved in Theo's care until he's stable. Dr. Whitmore looked up from her examination. Actually, that's not a bad idea. First shifts require careful monitoring, especially traumatic ones. Having someone with medical training available would be helpful. Julian wanted to refuse. Wanted to get Theo somewhere secure. Somewhere away from this woman who'd already seen too much. But Theo's hand was still tangled in Harper's discarded sweater. And when Dr. Whitmore tried to remove it, the boy whimpered and held on tighter. Fine, Julian said. But we do this on my terms. Harper's smile was knife-sharp. As long as those terms include listening to medical expertise, we have a deal. Victoria made a sound that might have been approval or exasperation. Dr. Whitmore returned to her examination, and Julian looked down at his son, wondering how a simple night had become so catastrophically complicated. Theo's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were still amber, still more wolf than human. Then they faded to light brown and focused on Harper. You stayed, Theo whispered. I told you I would. Harper moved closer, her hand gently brushing damp hair from Theo's forehead. How do you feel? Everything hurts. I know, sweetheart. But Dr. Whitmore is going to help you feel better. Julian watched his son relax at her touch. Watched the fear ease from Theo's face. And in the growing light of dawn, with his son's life balanced on a knife's edge, and a strange human woman somehow at the center of everything, Julian realized the truth. Nothing would be simple, ever again. Chapter 3. An Unlikely Bond. 3 days passed in a rhythm Harper never could have imagined. She'd called the hospital and taken personal leave, citing a family emergency that wasn't entirely a lie. Her small house had become something between a hospital and a sanctuary, with Dr. Whitmore checking in twice daily and Victoria's security team maintaining a discreet perimeter. And then there was Julian. Julian, the Alpha King, as she now knew him to be, had taken over her guest room and transformed it into a mobile office. Harper would walk past and see him on video calls, his voice dropping into tones of absolute authority. Then Theo would call for him, and that voice would soften into something almost gentle. Theo himself remained weak but steadily improving. The transformations had stopped, his body finally settling into his human form. Harper had moved a cot into her bedroom so the boy could sleep nearby, and she'd wake in the night to find him watching her with those light brown eyes that held too much grief for someone so young. It was late afternoon on the third day when Theo finally spoke more than a few words at a time. Harper was preparing soup in the kitchen when she heard small footsteps behind her. "Can I help?" Theo asked, his voice still rough from disuse. Harper turned to find him standing in the doorway, wearing clothes that Victoria had brought. "You should be resting." "I'm tired of resting." Theo moved closer, walking carefully, as if still getting used to his own body. "My mom used to let me help cook." The words hung in the air between them. Harper set down the wooden spoon and gestured to the chair beside the counter. "Then you can tell me if I'm doing this right. I'm not much of a cook." Theo climbed onto the chair and watched her work. For several minutes they existed in comfortable silence. Then, quietly, he said, "You smell like her," Theo said softly. "Like my mom." They spoke again about Isabel, but this time Theo didn't cry. He listened. He nodded. And when Harper told him that love never caused death, he seemed to believe her. Or at least, he wanted to try. Harper quietly stepped away, giving them privacy. But Theo's hand shot out and caught her sleeve. "Don't go," he said. "Please." So Harper stayed, standing beside them, and felt the strange weight of being included in something that wasn't hers, but needed her presence anyway. That evening, after Theo had fallen asleep on the couch, and Julian had carried him to Harper's bedroom, Julian lingered in the kitchen where Harper was cleaning up dinner dishes. "Thank you," he said finally, "for what you said to him. About Isabel." Harper rinsed a plate, not looking at him. "You heard that?" "Most of it." Julian leaned against the counter, and Harper was struck by how exhausted he looked. "I've had specialists try to get him to talk about his mother. Child psychologists, grief counselors. He wouldn't say a word to any of them. Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't supposed to fix you." Harper set the plate in the drainer. "Someone who doesn't have expectations. You're good with him." It wasn't what Harper had expected to hear. She turned, finding Julian watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm just trying to help. It's more than that." Julian's gaze drifted to where Theo slept. "He's attached to you. Dr. Whitmore says it's something called imprinting." Harper frowned. "What does that mean?" "In shifter children, especially during traumatic first shifts, they can form instinctive bonds with people who represent safety." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "The combination of factors, your scent matching Isabel's perfume, the timing of his transformation, you helping him, it created a connection. Theo's wolf recognizes you as safe, as someone maternal." The word hit Harper harder than she'd expected. "I'm not his mother. No. But right now, part of his instinct thinks you could be." Julian's jaw tightened. "Dr. Whitmore says forcing separation could trigger another traumatic shift. He needs time to adjust." "How much time?" "She doesn't know." "Days. Weeks." His expression hardened. "I have responsibilities I've been neglecting. A territory to govern. The regional council is already questioning my absence. One alpha in particular, Vaughn Stone, has been vocal about concerns regarding my leadership." Harper heard what he wasn't saying. "And me being involved makes that worse. A human knowing about shifters, staying in close contact with the Alpha King's son, it's unprecedented. It's ammunition for anyone who wants to question whether I'm fit to lead." Harper dried her hands on a towel. "So what are you saying?" "In 48 hours, I need to return to my territory. Theo comes with me." Julian met her eyes. "Dr. Whitmore thinks you should come too. Temporarily. Until Theo adjusts. You want me to go with you?" Harper said it slowly, testing the words. "To where, exactly?" "The Frost Complex. About 3 hours from here. Officially a corporate headquarters, but it's the center of my territory. My home. Harper thought about her tiny house, her predictable life. Then she thought about Theo's face when he'd cried in her arms. I have a job. A life. I know. Julian's voice was quiet. I'm not asking lightly. But my son needs you right now, and I don't have another solution. Harper looked past Julian to where she could just see Theo's sleeping form through the bedroom doorway. The boy who'd been a wolf on her kitchen table. The boy who'd lost his mother and blamed himself for it. She thought about going back to her empty house after they left. Going back to 12-hour shifts and lonely meals and a life that fit her but didn't fulfill her. Temporarily, Harper said. Until he's stable. Then I come home. Something flickered across Julian's face. Relief, maybe. Or something more complicated. Agreed. And while I'm there, I'm not some secret to be hidden away. I'm there for Theo's health, which means I need to be able to do my job. Within reason. Within medical reason, Harper corrected. If that's a problem, you can find someone else. Julian's eyes narrowed, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. You don't back down, do you? Not when a patient needs me. Harper held his gaze. Is that going to be a problem? Probably. But Julian extended his hand. We leave in 2 days. Harper shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. I'm holding you to that temporary part. I wouldn't expect anything less. But as Julian left the kitchen and Harper returned to her dishes, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this arrangement would be temporary. That the moment she'd found that wolf pup in the road, her entire life had shifted onto a new path, and there was no going back. Chapter 4. Into his world. The Frost complex rose from the landscape like something out of a different reality. Harper had expected corporate sterility, glass and steel reflecting the Oregon sky. What she got instead was a sprawling compound that blended modern architecture with natural stone, situated on acres of forest that seemed endless. Security checkpoints were disguised as landscaping features, and the people moving through the grounds moved with a predatory grace that marked them as anything but human. This is where you live? Harper asked, as their SUV passed through the third security gate. Home, Julian corrected from the driver's seat. Theo was dozing against Harper's shoulder in the back, finally relaxed after the 3-hour drive. You'll be staying in the guest wing, close to Theo's rooms. Victoria, who'd ridden up front, turned to look at Harper. The staff has been briefed. They know you're here for Theo's medical care. Harper heard the warning beneath the words. Don't ask questions. Don't dig deeper. Exist in the space we've carved out for you. She'd never been good at staying in carved-out spaces. The SUV pulled up to the main residence, and Harper's breath caught despite herself. It was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with craftsmanship. Stone and wood and glass combining to create something that felt both powerful and welcoming. Julian carried the still-sleeping Theo, while a young woman with honey-colored hair appeared to show Harper to her rooms. The suite was larger than her entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the forest. A king bed dominated one wall, and through an open doorway she could see a bathroom that probably violated several water conservation laws. Theo's room is just down the hall, the young woman said. Mr. Frost's private quarters are in the east wing. Dinner is at 7 if you'd like to join. I'll come down, Harper decided. Hiding felt like conceding territory she hadn't agreed to give up. After unpacking her single suitcase, feeling absurd at how little space her belongings took up in the massive closet, Harper heard a knock. Theo stood in the doorway holding a tablet. Dad says you should have this, Theo said, offering it to her. It has maps of the complex and emergency contacts. Thanks. How are you feeling? Tired, but better. Theo hesitated. Do you want to see my room? It's bigger than our old apartment. Harper followed Theo down the hall to a room that was clearly designed for a child, but felt oddly impersonal. Top-of-the-line gaming system, shelves of books that looked unread, expensive toys still in their packaging. A room that money had been thrown at, but that lacked the lived-in warmth of actual childhood. Do you like it here? Harper asked carefully. Theo shrugged. Everyone's really nice, and there's other kids to play with. But it's not home. Where's home? I don't know anymore. Theo sat on his bed, looking impossibly young. Is that weird? To not know where home is? Harper sat beside him. No, sweetheart. I think a lot of people feel that way. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Theo said, Harper, are you going to leave soon? Not until you're better. That's the deal. But then you'll go. It wasn't a question. Harper thought about lying, about offering comfort that would only make the eventual separation harder. But Theo deserved honesty. Then I'll go back to my house. But we can talk on the phone. And maybe you can visit. Theo nodded. But his fingers twisted in his blanket. Everyone leaves eventually. The words broke Harper's heart. Not everyone. Your dad's not going anywhere. He's here. But he's not really here. He's always working or in meetings. Theo looked up at her. You actually see me? Like I'm a person, not just something that needs to be fixed. Harper pulled Theo into a hug. You're not broken. You're grieving, and that's different. That's human, or shifter, whatever. Theo's laugh was watery, but it was there. Dinner that evening was an experience Harper hadn't anticipated. The dining room could have seated 40, but only 6 places were set at one end of the long table. Julian sat at the head, with Theo on his right, and Harper beside Theo. Victoria sat across from Harper, and 2 others joined them. Owen Pierce, introduced as Julian's beta, and Dr. Whitmore. Owen was younger than Harper had expected, with an easy smile that seemed designed to put people at ease. He shook her hand with genuine warmth. So you're the brave soul who took on this lot. My condolences. Owen. Julian's voice held warning. But Harper caught the hint of amusement beneath it. What? I'm welcoming her. Owen grinned at Harper. Fair warning. Dinners here can get political. Feel free to kick me under the table if you need rescuing. Dinner was surprisingly good, and the conversation flowed more easily than Harper had expected. Owen asked about her work as a nurse, genuinely interested in her answers. Dr. Whitmore updated them on Theo's progress in clinical terms that made the boy roll his eyes. Even Victoria unbent slightly, discussing local news with a dry wit that surprised Harper. Then the doors opened, and the atmosphere shifted. The man who entered was roughly Julian's age, with sandy hair and cold eyes that swept the room and landed on Harper with predatory interest. Julian's posture went rigid. Vaughn, Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting you. I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by. Vaughn Stone, the alpha who'd been questioning Julian's leadership. He moved to the table without invitation, pulling out the chair beside Victoria. I see you've brought your pet human home. The insult hung in the air. Harper felt Owen tense beside her, saw Victoria's eyes narrow. Julian's knuckles went white on his fork. Harper is here as Theo's healthcare provider, Julian said, each word measured. Show some respect. Of course. Vaughn's smile was all teeth. I'm sure that's all she is. Harper had spent years dealing with condescending doctors and dismissive patients. She knew how to handle men who thought they could intimidate her. She set down her water glass and met Vaughn's eyes directly. I'm sorry. I don't think we've been properly introduced. You must be the alpha who has concerns about Julian's leadership. Harper kept her voice pleasant. It's interesting that those concerns seem to center around a 9-year-old boy's medical needs. I'd have thought you'd have more pressing territorial matters to attend to. The table went silent. Owen made a sound that might have been a choked laugh. Victoria's expression could have cut glass. Julian was staring at Harper like he'd never seen her before. Vaughn's smile dropped. You don't know anything about our world. You're right. I don't. But I know people. Harper leaned back in her chair, completely at ease. And I know when someone's using concern as camouflage for ambition. Vaughn stood abruptly. Julian, control your human. She's not mine to control. Julian's voice was deadly quiet. And she makes a good point. If you have concerns about my leadership, bring them to the council formally. Don't show up at my home during family dinner to make veiled accusations. The 2 alphas stared at each other, and Harper felt the weight of power filling the room. The air itself seemed to thicken. She glanced at Theo, who'd gone very still, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Finally, Vaughn stepped back. This conversation isn't over. No, Julian agreed. But it's over for tonight. Owen will see you out. After Vaughn left, escorted by a too cheerful Owen, the remaining dinner guests sat in loaded silence. Victoria was the first to speak. That was either very brave or very stupid. Harper met her eyes. I have a low tolerance for bullies. He's not just a bully. He's a regional alpha with significant influence. But Victoria's lips twitched. Though, I admit, watching someone call him out was satisfying. Julian stood, his dinner clearly over. Harper, a word. Please. Harper followed him out of the dining room and into what appeared to be a private study. Julian closed the door and turned to face her. You can't do that again, he said. Challenge someone who's insulting me? I absolutely can. You challenged an alpha in his territory. That's dangerous. I'm in your territory, Harper corrected. And you invited me here to help your son. Part of that means not letting people treat me like something you scraped off your shoe. Julian stepped closer, and Harper was suddenly very aware of how much larger he was, how much power radiated from him. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me. Because right now, all I see is a system designed to keep people in their place, and I've never been good at staying in mine. For a long moment, Julian just looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a rough sound, unused, but genuine. No, he said. You're really not, are you? Is that a problem? Julian's smile faded into something more complex. I honestly don't know yet. But as Harper left his study and returned to her guest room, she realized something had shifted. She'd been brought here for Theo, but she'd just made her first move in a much larger game, and she had no intention of losing. Chapter 5. Blood and Trust. In the 2 weeks that followed, Harper fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings she spent with Theo, supervising his training sessions with Dr. Whitmore and Owen. The boy was learning to control his shifts, moving between forms with increasing ease. Harper took notes, asked questions, learned the subtle signs of when his control was slipping. Afternoons belonged to Julian. He'd started teaching her self-defense in one of the compound's training rooms, claiming that if she insisted on staying, she needed to be able to protect herself. The sessions were intense, leaving Harper bruised and breathless. Evenings they ate together, the three of them, in the smaller family dining room. Theo would talk about his day, excited about the progress he was making. Julian would listen, his eyes softening when he looked at his son in ways Harper suspected he didn't realize. And Harper would watch them both, feeling the strange pull of belonging to something she'd never asked for. The tension between her and Julian had shifted into something else, something that crackled in the air when their hands touched during training, when their eyes met across the dinner table, something neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. Victoria noticed, of course. You're playing a dangerous game, she said one afternoon, catching Harper in the hallway. I'm not playing anything. Aren't you? Victoria's expression was unreadable. Julian hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since Isabel died. Just be careful. The world you've entered doesn't forgive human weaknesses. And feelings, Harper, are the greatest weakness of all. That afternoon, Theo had his scheduled training session in the forest area of the compound. It was a controlled environment, monitored by security, where young shifters could practice in their wolf forms. Harper went along, carrying her medical kit, and standing at the edge of the clearing, while Dr. Whitmore guided Theo through exercises. Owen joined her, leaning against a tree. He's doing well. Better than most kids his age after a traumatic first shift. He's resilient, Harper agreed, watching Theo in his wolf form navigate an obstacle course. So are you. Owen glanced at her. Not many humans could walk into our world and hold their ground the way you have. Before Harper could respond, Theo shifted course, running deeper into the forest. Dr. Whitmore called out, her voice sharp. Theo, stay in the boundary. But Theo kept running. Harper's instincts flared. Something's wrong. She was already moving, Owen right behind her. They found Theo at the far edge of the clearing, still in wolf form, hackles raised and growling at something in the shadows. 3 wolves emerged from the forest, larger than Theo, darker, their eyes gleaming with intelligence that was distinctly human. Rogues, shifters who didn't belong to any pack. Back away slowly, Owen said, his voice calm but edged with steel. He was already changing, his body rippling as he shifted. But one of the rogues lunged, not at Owen, but at Theo. Harper didn't think. She threw herself forward, putting her body between the rogue and the boy. She felt the impact, claws raking across her arm, hot blood blooming through her shirt. Pain exploded through her nerves, but she stayed upright, stayed between them. Owen hit the rogue like a freight train, and suddenly the clearing was chaos. Dr. Whitmore was shouting into a radio. Security guards were pouring in from all directions. The rogues scattered, but not before one turned back, its eyes locking on Harper with unmistakable intent. Then it was gone, vanished into the forest. Harper dropped to her knees, her arms screaming. Theo shifted back to human form, naked and terrified, throwing himself at her. "Harper, you're hurt." "I'm okay, sweetheart." "I'm okay." But her vision was swimming, and she could feel blood soaking through her sleeve. Owen was suddenly there, pulling off his shirt to press it against her wound. "Medic is coming." "Hold on." The next minutes blurred. Dr. Whitmore examining her arm, pronouncing the cuts deep but not life-threatening. Security guards spreading out. And then Julian arrived, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees. He was barely holding his human form. Harper could see it in the way his eyes flickered gold, in the tension of his jaw, in the controlled violence of his movements as he crossed to where she sat. "Who?" It wasn't a question. It was a command, directed at Owen. 3 rogues. I didn't recognize their scent, but they were organized. This wasn't random. Owen's expression was grim. They went straight for Theo. Harper got in the way. Julian's eyes finally landed on Harper, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Rage, yes, but also fear. Raw fear that twisted something in her chest. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice barely human. "But I wasn't, and neither was Theo. That's not the point." Julian crouched in front of her, and she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You're not trained for this. You could have died. So could Theo." Harper met his eyes steadily. "Would you rather I'd stood there and watched?" Julian's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, she thought he might actually shift right there. Then he stood abruptly, turning to Owen. "Find them. Find out who sent them and why. And double security on the family wing. No one gets close to Theo or Harper without clearance from me personally." He didn't look at Harper again before he walked away. In the medical wing, Dr. Whitmore cleaned and bandaged Harper's arm while Theo sat beside her, holding her uninjured hand and refusing to let go. The cuts were deep, 4 parallel lines that would scar. "You saved me," Theo whispered. "Of course I did." Harper squeezed his hand. "That's what family does." The word hung in the air between them. "Are we family?" Harper's throat tightened. She thought about maintaining the professional distance she was supposed to keep. But looking at this boy who'd lost so much, she couldn't lie. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think maybe we are." That evening, Julian came to her room. She was sitting by the window, her bandaged arm resting on a pillow, watching the sun set over the forest. He knocked once, then entered without waiting. "How's your arm?" he asked. "Painful, but I'll live." Harper turned to face him. "How's the hunt going?" "We found the rogues' trail. They crossed into Von Stone's territory." Harper's stomach dropped. "You think he sent them?" "I think it's convenient that rogues would attack days after Von made his displeasure about you very public." Julian moved to stand by the window. "There's no proof. Not yet. But I'm going to find it." "And then what?" "Then I deal with it." His voice was flat, final. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Julian said quietly, "You shouldn't have done that. Put yourself between Theo and danger." "Yes, I should have." "Harper." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his expression stole her breath. "When Owen radioed that you were hurt, when I saw you bleeding, He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I can't lose anyone else. You won't lose me." The words came out before she could stop them, a promise she had no right to make. Julian reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "You don't know what you're saying, what you're promising, don't I?" Harper's heart was racing. "I'm exactly where I chose to be, Julian. No one forced me." His hand finally touched her cheek, and Harper's eyes closed at the contact. When she opened them again, Julian was closer. "This is a mistake," he said. But his thumb was tracing the line of her jaw. Probably. And then he was kissing her, and Harper's world narrowed to the pressure of his mouth on hers. The careful way his hand cradled her face. It was desperate and controlled, and everything she hadn't known she'd been wanting. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates everything," he said. "I know. Victoria's going to have my head. Probably." Harper's laugh was breathless. "Worth it, though." Julian's smile was brief but genuine. "Yeah, it really is." Neither of them slept much that night. Not for the same reasons. But as he left her room, both of them knew that Kiss had changed something fundamental. The line between professional and personal had been crossed. Chapter 6. Political Games. Julian called the emergency council meeting for the following morning. Harper wasn't invited, but she didn't need to be present to know what was being discussed. The attack on Theo had been the spark, but the real fire was about her. Victoria found her in the library. "The council wants you gone," Victoria said without preamble. "Aldous Crane is pushing for memory erasure. He's claiming you're a security risk." Harper set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "And what does Julian say?" "He's fighting them. But there's a complication. Vaughn Stone has been invited to the council meeting. He has the right as a regional alpha to address security concerns." "Of course he does." Harper's laugh was bitter. "But Julian's playing a different game. He's declared you under his personal protection as a potential companion. It's not a mate bond, but it's a public declaration of intent. It puts you under his jurisdiction by shifter law." Harper's breath caught. "He what?" "He's claiming you." Victoria leaned forward. "Do you understand what that means? You're no longer just Theo's caretaker. You're Julian's acknowledged romantic interest. It makes you untouchable by council decree. But it also makes his authority vulnerable if the relationship is seen as a weakness. He should have asked me first. He was protecting you the only way he knew how." But Victoria's tone suggested she didn't entirely disagree. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" What Harper did was storm into Julian's private study the moment the council meeting ended. She didn't knock. She opened the door with enough force that it slammed against the wall. "We need to talk," Harper said. Julian dismissed the two alphas who'd been in the room with him. Once the door closed, Julian stood. "I can explain. You declared me your potential companion without asking me," Harper said, fury in her voice. "Not just about my life, about how the council sees us. If I'm going to stand beside you, I need to understand the strategy, not just live with the consequences. The council was going to force your removal. This was the only option that kept you safe in here. I don't care." Harper crossed the room. "I didn't come to your world to be protected like some fragile thing that can't make her own choices. Whatever this is between us, it doesn't give you the right to control my life." Julian's jaw tightened. "I'm the Alpha King. I make decisions that affect everyone under my protection. I'm not one of your pack members. I'm a human woman who's been taking care of your son, and apparently falling for you despite all the warning signs." Harper's voice cracked slightly. "And if we're going to be anything, it has to be as equals. Not as authority and subordinate. As partners who make decisions together." The silence stretched between them. "You're right," Julian said finally. "I should have talked to you first. Should have given you the choice. Yes, you should have. But Harper, you need to understand something." Julian moved around the desk. "The world I inhabit, the position I hold, it's designed around authority and control. I've spent 35 years making decisions that affect thousands of lives, and I'm not used to asking permission." "Then learn." Harper held his gaze. "Because I won't be with someone who treats me as a possession to be managed." Julian's expression shifted into something that might have been admiration mixed with frustration. "You don't make anything easy, do you?" "Not in my nature." He reached out slowly and cupped her face in his hands. "If we do this, if we make this real, it's going to be harder than anything you've faced before. The council will use our relationship as ammunition. Vaughn will escalate his challenges, and you'll be at the center of political games that could turn dangerous. I know. You could walk away right now. Go back to your life, your job. Be safe." Harper placed her hands over his. "I could. But I won't." Not because you declared me anything, but because I choose to stay. I choose you and Theo, and whatever comes with that. But Julian, every major decision that affects us both needs to be something we make together. Can you do that? Julian studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yes, I can try. I will try. That's all I'm asking. He kissed her then, and it was different from before. This one was a promise, a commitment. When they pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. The council accepted the declaration, but there are conditions, he said quietly. They want proof that our relationship is genuine. And Vaughn submitted a formal challenge. Harper's stomach dropped. What kind of challenge? The traditional kind. A fight for position. He's claiming I'm unfit to lead because my judgment is compromised by my feelings for a human. Julian's voice was carefully controlled. I have 72 hours to accept or decline. If I decline, I forfeit my position. And if you accept, then I fight him to submission or death. Harper pulled back enough to see his face. He could kill you. He could try. Julian's smile was grim. But I've held this position for 15 years for a reason. This is because of me. Because he sees me as your weakness. No. Julian's hands tightened on her shoulders. This is because Vaughn has been looking for an excuse to challenge me for years. You're just the justification he's using. Harper thought about what Victoria had said, about feelings being the greatest weakness. What if he's right? What if I'm making you vulnerable? Then I'll be vulnerable. Julian's eyes met hers with absolute certainty. I spent 8 months after Isabel died being strong, being controlled, being the alpha king everyone expected. And I was hollow inside. You and Theo brought me back. If that's weakness, then I choose it. The words hit Harper harder than she'd expected. You're going to accept the challenge. I have to. Declining would throw every pack into chaos. When? 3 days from now. Neutral territory witnessed by the full council. Julian's expression hardened. I need these days to prepare. Owen will help. But Harper, I need you to understand that there's a real possibility I could lose. You won't. You don't know that. No, I don't. But I believe in you anyway. Harper reached up and pulled him down for another kiss. Fierce and desperate. And I'm not going anywhere. Julian's laugh was rough. Victoria's going to love that you're being stubborn. Victoria can deal with it. As if summoned, a knock came at the door. Victoria entered, her expression grave. We have a problem. Security just found evidence that links the rogue attack to Vaughn's territory. One of our newer guards was being paid to disable sensors. Julian went very still. The guard? In custody. He's confessed to taking money from an intermediary. The trail leads back to companies registered in Colorado. Victoria's eyes were hard. By shifter law, it's enough to establish intent. He orchestrated an attack on my son to create justification for his challenge. Julian's voice dropped into something barely human. That goes beyond political maneuvering, which is exactly what he wants you to say. Victoria looked between them. If you accuse him publicly without irrefutable proof, you look paranoid. If you stay silent, you look weak. Harper's mind was working through the implications. What if you don't play his game at all? What if you just beat him in the challenge? Prove through action that you're still the strongest alpha. Victoria's eyebrows rose. That's surprisingly pragmatic. I'm a nurse. We deal with life and death by focusing on what we can control. Harper looked at Julian. You can't control what Vaughn does or what the council thinks, but you can control how you fight and what you prove when you win. Julian studied her face. When I win, not if. When. Harper's voice was steady. Because losing isn't an option. Theo needs his father, and I need you too. So you're going to win. Victoria cleared her throat. I'll leave you two to discuss strategy. But Julian, we need to start training immediately. Vaughn's younger and faster. We need to work on endurance and tactics. After Victoria left, Julian pulled Harper close, wrapping his arms around her. 3 days, he said into her hair. 3 days, Harper agreed. And she tried very hard not to think about all the ways those 3 days could end in disaster. Chapter 7. The Challenge. The 3 weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Harper watched Julian train with Owen in the compound's private arena, their sessions brutal and exhausting. She learned more about shifter combat than she'd ever wanted to know. Learned that fights to submission weren't civilized affairs with referees and rules. They were primal, violent, and often ended in permanent injury. She also learned about shifter politics through Victoria, who walked her through the intricacies of council dynamics, pack alliances, and the delicate balance of power that Julian maintained. It was more complex than any hospital administration Harper had navigated, with higher stakes and deadlier consequences. Theo struggled with the knowledge that his father was going to fight. Harper spent hours with him, explaining in terms a 9-year-old could understand that sometimes people had to stand up for what was right even when it was scary, that bravery wasn't about not being afraid, but about doing what needed to be done despite the fear. The night before the challenge, Julian came to Harper's room. He looked exhausted, bruises from training visible on his arms, but his eyes were clear and determined. "I need you to promise me something," he said. Harper set aside the medical journal she'd been pretending to read. "What?" "If something goes wrong tomorrow, if I don't make it." He held up a hand when Harper opened her mouth to protest. "Just listen. If I don't make it, Owen becomes regent until Theo is old enough to lead. But Theo, he's going to need you. He's going to need someone who isn't pack, who isn't tangled up in shifter politics. Someone who sees him as a boy, not as the future alpha king. Julian, promise me," his voice cracked slightly, "promise me you'll stay with him, that you won't leave him alone in this world." Harper crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You're not going to lose. But yes, I promise, if the impossible happens, I'll stay with Theo. I'll make sure he's okay." Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I didn't mean to, didn't plan for it, but I do." Harper's eyes burned with tears. "I love you too. Which is why you're going to win tomorrow, because I'm not ready to lose you." They spent the night together, not talking about the challenge or what might happen, just existing in the same space, holding each other, memorizing the feeling of being together, in case tomorrow took it all away. The challenge took place on neutral ground, a clearing in the forest 2 hours from the Frost Complex. When Harper, Theo, and Owen arrived, the space was already filled with shifters. Alphas from every region, council members, pack representatives, hundreds of witnesses. Vaughn was already there, stripped to the waist, his body marked with scars that told their own story of violence survived. He looked confident, relaxed. Julian arrived last, and the crowd parted for him. He was in dark clothing, his expression carved from stone. His eyes found Harper and Theo in the crowd, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. Harper saw the man beneath the authority, the father who was terrified. Then the moment passed, and Julian was addressing the council. "I accept this challenge under the ancient laws," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Vaughn Stone questions my fitness to lead. Let the strongest alpha prove the truth." Vaughn smiled. "Gladly." The rules were established quickly. Fight until one submitted or died. No interference from outside parties. The winner would be recognized as Alpha King by all assembled packs. Harper felt Theo's hand slip into hers. His whole body was trembling. "I don't want to watch," he whispered. "Then don't," Harper said quietly. "Close your eyes if you need to. I'll tell you when it's over." But Theo didn't close his eyes. He watched as his father stripped off his shirt and walked to the center of the clearing, watched as both men began to shift. The transformation was nothing like Theo's painful first shift. Both Julian and Vaughn moved through the change with fluid grace, human forms giving way to massive wolves that were far larger than any natural animal. Vaughn's wolf was sandy-colored, lean and built for speed. Julian's was darker, heavily muscled, radiating power. They circled each other, and then Vaughn lunged. The fight was brutal from the first second. Vaughn was fast, darting in and out, his claws finding purchase before Julian could counter. Julian was methodical, weathering the attacks, waiting for openings. When he struck, it was with crushing force that sent Vaughn sprawling. Harper forced herself to watch, to not look away even when blood stained both wolves' fur. This was Julian's world. These were the stakes he lived with every day. If she was going to be part of his life, she had to see all of it. The fight dragged on. Minutes that felt like hours. Vaughn was tiring, his attacks becoming less coordinated. But Julian was slowing too, his movements heavier. Then Harper saw it. Vaughn's claws gleamed with something that wasn't blood, something oily that made Julian stagger when the next strike connected. Wolf's bane, Owen hissed beside her. That bastard poisoned his claws. It was legal, Harper remembered from Victoria's lessons. Technically within the rules if applied before the challenge began. But it was also a sign of weakness. Julian was weakening fast, the poison working through his system. Vaughn circled, preparing for what he clearly thought would be a killing blow. And then Theo screamed, "Dad!" It wasn't a word. It was raw terror, a child's cry for his father. The sound cut through the clearing, through the bloodlust and violence, straight to something primal in Julian's wolf. Harper felt it, even as a human. The way the air changed. The way Julian's wolf went from defensive to something else entirely. Not rage, but purpose. The absolute refusal to fall while his son needed him. Julian moved faster than he had the entire fight. He caught Vaughn mid-lunge, jaws closing around the younger wolf's throat. Not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to immobilize. They went down together, and for a long moment, the clearing was silent. Then Vaughn shifted back to human form, the universal sign of submission. Around them, the gathered alphas bowed their heads, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The hierarchy had spoken. The Alpha King still reigned. "I yield!" he gasped out. "I yield!" Julian released him, stepping back, his wolf form wavering as the poison worked through his system. He managed 3 steps toward where Harper and Theo stood before his legs gave out. Harper was moving before anyone could stop her, sliding to her knees beside Julian's wolf. "Change back," she said urgently. "Julian, you need to shift back so Dr. Whitmore can treat you." The transformation was agonizing to watch. Julian's wolf fought it, the poison disrupting the change. But finally, he was human again, bleeding and barely conscious. Dr. Whitmore was there with a medical kit, injecting something that Harper recognized as an antitoxin. "He'll live," the doctor said, "but he needs to get to the medical wing. Now." The next hours blurred together. Julian in the medical wing, fighting off the effects of the wolf's bane. Theo refusing to leave his father's side. Harper coordinating with the medical staff, using her nursing training to monitor vitals and assist Dr. Whitmore. Victoria handled the political fallout. Vaughn was stripped of his regional alpha position for using poison without declaring it publicly beforehand. It was technically legal, but considered dishonorable, and the council voted unanimously to remove him from any position of authority. Julian's victory was absolute, not just because he'd won, but because he'd won despite being poisoned. Proof that he was still the strongest alpha. It was dawn when Julian finally woke, his eyes clear and focused. The first thing he saw was Theo asleep in a chair beside the bed, and Harper standing by the window. "We won," he said, his voice rough. "You won." Harper crossed to the bed. "Though you scared the hell out of us doing it." Julian reached for her hand. "Told you I was hard to kill. Don't make jokes." But Harper was smiling through tears. "You almost died, but I didn't." Julian's gaze moved to Theo. "Because I had something to live for. 2 somethings, actually." Harper leaned down and kissed him gently. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll do my best." Theo stirred, waking slowly. When he saw his father awake, his face crumpled. "You won. Come here," Julian said. And Theo climbed onto the bed, careful of his father's injuries. Julian wrapped his arms around his son. "I'm okay. We're all okay." Harper watched them together, father and son, and felt something settle in her chest. This was her family now. Unconventional, complicated, dangerous, but hers. And she'd fight just as hard as Julian had to protect it. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 2 weeks after the challenge, life at the Frost Complex had settled into a new rhythm. Julian was recovering well. The Wolfsbane's effects finally purged from his system. His authority as Alpha King had been solidified in a way that went beyond political maneuvering. He'd proven himself in the most primal way their world understood, but the real changes were happening in smaller, more personal ways. Harper stood in Julian's study, looking at the official documents spread across his desk. Victoria sat in one of the leather chairs, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. "The council has approved the position," Victoria said. "Counselor of Human Shifter Integration. You'd be the first, obviously. But with your involvement in Theo's care and your understanding of both worlds, you're uniquely qualified." Harper picked up one of the documents, scanning the detailed job description. It wasn't just a title. It was real work. Establishing protocols for shifters who needed medical care from human doctors. Creating guidelines for the rare instances when humans discovered their world. Building bridges between two species that had existed in careful separation for centuries. "It's not going to be easy," Harper said. "There are going to be shifters who resent a human having any authority." "Probably," Julian agreed from where he leaned against his desk. "But you've already proven you can handle opposition. And Harper, this isn't about giving you a position because you're with me. This is about recognizing that the shifter world needs to evolve. We need someone who can help us navigate that transition." Harper met his eyes. "And if this doesn't work? If I fail? Then we try something else." Julian crossed to her, taking her hands. "But I don't think you'll fail." The offer was tempting. More than tempting. It was the chance to do meaningful work, to build something from nothing. But it also meant committing fully to this world. Letting go of the life she'd known before. "I need time to think about it," Harper said finally. Victoria nodded. "Take whatever time you need." That evening, Harper found herself in the compound's medical wing, watching as Theo demonstrated his shifting control for Dr. Whitmore. The boy moved through the transformation smoothly now, his wolf form smaller than the adult shifters but perfectly controlled. When he shifted back, he was grinning with pride. "Did you see? I did it in under 30 seconds. "I saw." Harper handed him the clothes he'd left in a neat pile. "You've come a long way from that scared pup I found in the road." Theo's expression softened. "That feels like it happened to someone else. Like a different life. In a way, it did." Harper sat on the edge of the examination table while Theo dressed. "You're not the same person you were then. Neither am I." "Are you going to stay?" Theo asked suddenly. "Dad said the council offered you a job. Are you going to take it?" Harper considered how to answer. "I don't know yet. It's a big decision." But you're not leaving because of me anymore, right?" "I'm better now." "You don't have to stay just to take care of me." "No, I don't have to," Harper agreed. "But Theo, even if I took the job, it wouldn't be just because of you or your dad. It would be because I chose to. Because this is where I want to be." Theo studied her face. "Do you want to be here?" Harper thought about her old life. The empty house, the predictable routine, the loneliness she'd stopped noticing. Then she thought about the past few weeks. The chaos and danger and fear, yes, but also the feeling of being part of something, of mattering to people who mattered to her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I do." Theo threw his arms around her, hugging her tight. "Good, because I'd miss you if you left." "I'd miss you too, sweetheart." That night, Harper made her decision. She found Julian in the family room, going over reports with Owen. When she appeared in the doorway, Julian looked up and immediately dismissed Owen. "You've decided," Julian said. It wasn't a question. "I have." Harper crossed to him. "I'm going to take the position. But I have conditions." Julian's eyebrow arched. "Of course you do. I keep my nursing license active. I want to work part-time at a local hospital, maintain my skills outside of shifter medicine. Reasonable. And I want a seat at council meetings when topics related to human-shifter relations are discussed, not as an observer, as a voting member. That one's going to be harder to get approved, but I think I can make it happen. And our relationship, whatever this becomes, stays private. I'm not interested in being paraded around as proof of anything." Julian's smile was slow and genuine. "I think I can agree to those terms." "Anything else?" Harper pretended to think. "I want my own office, with good natural light and a door that locks." "Done." Julian pulled her down onto the couch beside him. So you're staying. Really staying. Just staying, Harper confirmed. Are you okay with that? Julian's answer was to kiss her, and Harper felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was right. Unconventional and complicated, and nothing like the life she'd imagined, but right. When they pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. There's one more thing. It's traditional, when an alpha commits to a mate, to have a formal ceremony. It's called a bonding. Harper's breath caught. Are you asking me to marry you? Shifter style? Eventually, yes, but not yet. Julian's thumb traced her cheekbone. We've only known each other for 2 months. We've been through hell together. But that doesn't mean we need to rush. I'm asking if you'd be open to it. Someday, when we're both ready. Someday, Harper agreed. When we're both ready. I like that. 6 months later, Harper sat in her new office in the medical wing, reviewing proposals for a shifter-human medical liaison program. The work was challenging in ways she'd never expected, but it was also deeply satisfying. Her clinic was operational now, treating young shifters who'd experienced traumatic transformations. She'd developed protocols, trained staff, built something from nothing. And she'd maintained her part-time position at Mercy General, keeping one foot in the human world. A knock at her door made her look up. Theo stood in the doorway, now 10 years old and growing fast. He was taller, more confident, the grief that had weighed on him replaced by something lighter. Mom Harper, he said, and Harper's heart still caught every time he used that name. Dad wants to know if you're coming to dinner. Owen caught a huge salmon and he's trying to cook it himself. Should I be worried? Probably. But Dad says the fire extinguishers are ready. Harper laughed and saved her work. As she walked down the hall with Theo chattering about his day, she passed a mirror and caught her reflection. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Happier, more alive, like someone who'd finally found where she belonged. Dinner was chaos in the best way. Owen had indeed set off the smoke alarm, but the salmon was actually edible. Theo told elaborate stories about his shift training. Victoria stopped by with documents, but stayed for wine. Dr. Whitmore called with a question, and ended up joining via video chat. It was loud and messy and perfect. Later, after Theo had gone to bed and the guests had left, Harper and Julian stood on the balcony of his private quarters, looking out over the forest. The moon was full, and Harper could hear wolves howling in the distance, pack members running in the forest, free and wild. Do you ever regret it? Julian asked quietly. Giving up your old life? Harper thought about it seriously, about her empty house and predictable routines, about the loneliness she'd carried for so long. No, she said finally. I gave up existing for living. That's not a trait I regret. Julian pulled her close, and Harper let herself sink into his warmth. This was her family now. Julian with his fierce protectiveness and hidden vulnerability. Theo with his resilience and gentle heart. Victoria with her pragmatic wisdom. Owen with his irreverent humor. All of them. This strange patchwork family she'd stumbled into the night she found a wolf pup in the road. I love you, Julian said into her hair. I love you too. And in that moment, Harper knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. The journey had been terrifying and painful, and nothing like what she'd planned, but it had led her here. To this balcony. To this man. To this life. A life that wasn't safer or easier than the one she'd left behind, but it was hers. Fully, completely, irrevocably hers. And that made all the difference.